it's sort of hard to introduce Cokie Roberts. And if any of you sort of turn on NPR on Monday mornings like I do, and a sort of very well recognized name within our community, author of best-selling books, very much focusing on the role of women. 40 years in the broadcasting industry, 3 Emmys, in essence sort of interesting the American women in radio and television as one of the 50 greatest women in the history of broadcasting. I think it's a role within our society that has been a critical one. But I think my own exposure to Kokie has been much more of what is it like to walk through the streets and of Port-au-Prince and visit schools as someone who serves on, in this case, in the board of Save the Children, and who has not only gives an astute analysis of our political system and its role and how it evolves, but also someone who has given of her time and her heart to the work of our community. So I want to introduce our moderator of our next session, Cokie Roberts, who will then introduce our next panel.
Well, what a treat it is to be here with all of you doing such wonderful work and having turned out in such great numbers. And I looked over the program for the forum, and it looks like you've had just a terrific series of days, and this is the last event, so stay awake. I know it's tough, but this is going to be a very interesting panel. But before we get to the conversation, we have an important award to give. And it is my great honor and pleasure to present the Interaction 2013 Congressional Leadership Award to Congressman Gerald Connolly of Virginia. Now, he has been a hero in terms of taking the issues of foreign aid, foreign assistance, development into the Congress, and even from enlightened Fairfax County. This is not popular. And so it is really something very special that you have done, Congressman Connolly. And he has now even said out loud and for the press to write down that he's taken up the mantle of Congressman Howard Berman of California, who, as you know, was defeated in the last election. So it's a somewhat shaky mantle to take up, but it's a very important one, to be the voice for foreign assistance on Capitol Hill. So that is terribly useful for all of us, and something that I'm really very pleased to be able to say that he has done in his role on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and his role as ranking members of some of those subcommittees. But before Congressman Connolly came to Congress, this is his 3rd term, he was also very active in all of these issues. He was a staff member for a long time on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He actually wrote a foreign aid authorization bill that got passed. This hardly ever happens. In fact, this is the last one that got passed, as I recall. It's usually slipped in through appropriations, and authorization just never happens. If you try to explain to a civics class how a bill becomes a law, it doesn't apply to foreign assistance. So the fact that he was able to put together that kind of compromise that was able to be passed by both houses of Congress and signed by the President is quite remarkable. He has also been executive director of the U.S. Committee for Refugees, where he has monitored all of the worldwide refugee challenges that you all know all too well are huge. And he served at the American Freedom from Hunger Foundation as an associate executive director, and there he was active in education and fundraising programs. And did global conferences for the UN meetings. So he has been very involved in development, even starting with the Heifer Project as a child. We thank you, Congressman Connolly, and if you would come up, we would like to give you your award. I've been warned that this is tricky.
Oh.
But here we go.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yes, there's the camera.
Wow. Oh, where's,
Come over here.
yeah.
There we go.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's
If you
beautiful.
put it here.
All right. It's heavy.
Do you want to say a word?
Just
before
very
we start
briefly,
the-
because I know you're all probably getting ready to leave. Carol, Koki, and I are the last thing between you and abject fuel. But I want to thank you all for this award. I was chuckling about what Koki said about even in enlightened Fairfax County, foreign aid isn't as popular as you might think. But I think it is very important that we regroup and that we redefine what development assistance means for the United States, and that we try to make sure that we reestablish our preeminence as a leader in development in partnership with other countries around the world in trying to make it a better place. We've got plenty of experience that tells us that as you lift the quality of life, as you lift the standard of living in so many respects, you improve the prospects for democratization. And it is very much in our self-interest to do that. And so trying to make that case and to try to make sure that we deliver that partnership assistance in a more efficient and effective way is really the goal here. The Cold War is kind of over. And some of the barnacles on legislation that is now 52 years old, we still require the president, technically in the law, to certify that any aid recipient is not actively collaborating in the international communist conspiracy. I guess President Obama does that, I'm not sure. But anyway, we have work to do, and that's what this is all about. And I thank you so much for this award, and I look forward to our panel discussion.
As Congressman Connolly comes back up, we also want to introduce Carol Lancaster, who is the
Wherever you wish,
head
Carol.
of the School of Foreign
I know much
Service
place.
at Georgetown University, as they've been very sweet to each other. This Alphonse and Gaston routine here, okay? Carol has also been Deputy USAID Director and written many books. And I hear you writing 2 at the same time right now.
After I finish being a dean.
That seems like a lot. But so it's very wonderful to have you with us. As you just said, this partnership is more important than ever in a lot of ways between NGOs and the government. The budget cutbacks, the desire for public-private interaction, all of that is very strong. But we're faced with this charming sequestration that is affecting all kinds of aspects of government. To what degree is it affecting the foreign assistance budget?
Well, sequestration and sort of the matters that we care about under that rubric between State Department and AID, the lion's share of it being an AID, it's almost $2 billion in cuts. So it's going to affect almost everything we do. Certainly it will affect that partnership you talked about, Koki, in terms of the nonprofit NGO partnership in the execution of aid funds with AID. So I'm very concerned about it.
Well, that's a huge amount. I mean, when you're talking, you've managed these budgets. I mean, when you talk about that amount of money, what does that mean?
When I managed these budgets, that's about all the money we had. So things have gotten a little better resourced. But I think $2 billion is actually has a bigger impact than the number sounds, no matter what your baseline is, because a lot of things are fixed by law or by politics, so that you can't easily change them. So that $2 billion, I don't know how the administration is going to deal with it, but it's likely to fall on programs that have less support rather than more support. And they can be sometimes the most important programs for poverty reduction. And that, I think, again, opens the door to the non-governmental organization community, because if I can say this, and you probably can't, this is probably the best organized element of the constituency for foreign aid and for development that we have in the country. And so I think we always have to bear in mind, I think, to have a conversation between the community here and the administration. Sometimes that conversation goes better than others. I hope it's going well, as in better than it has in the last couple of years. But I think this is going to be a challenge would be a challenge for any administration to manage. It's going to be serious.
I mean, this is, as you say, this is the best organized lobbying community, essentially, for these programs. But what you're always up against, as you know very well, is this notion that foreign aid is a huge part of the federal budget, and that if you just got rid of sending all that money abroad, would balance the federal budget.
Yeah.
And of course it is what?
It's less than 1% of the entire federal budget, and if you look at return on investment, it's a pretty high return, but it's very hard to make the argument in the current political climate. It's never been easy. The Cold War at least gave you some kind of clear rationale for why you might have a foreign aid program, because we're trying to help the good guys and the Soviets are helping the bad guys. We had our Yemen, they had their Yemen, we had our Korea, they had their Korea, you could go. Now who knows what kind of world we live in and why we do it. And you have to, one of the things I would say is, for the advocates of foreign assistance, development assistance, or economic assistance, we have to move beyond the sort of the normative. It's not sufficient to say, well, it's the right thing to do. That's only going to capture a certain percentage, frankly, of the public. And for those of us who have to run for office, I assure you, that's not a majority.
Right. Those saying that's the right thing to do. But there is the other element in terms of global policy, which is terrorism, which we've just been reminded of too horribly in the last couple of weeks. And that's a case that President Bush made repeatedly, as he did PEPFAR, for instance. So do you see that, either of you, as something that is resonant?
Well, I think what Jerry was basically saying is there needs to be an interest as well as an ethical drive behind the support for foreign assistance. And since we don't have the Cold War, and I'm not sure in the end how important that was either. I mean, the down and dirty politics was the Middle East. We got foreign aid through often because of the support of pro-Israeli groups, because that was part of the foreign aid bill. That's gone away now, so that's a lot harder to manage. But there are two other arguments, and Koki, you mentioned one. You can call it terrorism, you can call it national security, you can make it a little broader and call it failing in failed states. I think Dr. Kim mentioned that as well. Not that we're really sure what to do about that, but we know that it's important, and if we had thought that if we'd forgotten the incidents a couple of months ago in Mali, which we thought was doing great, some of us did anyway, will have reminded us that this is an ongoing challenge. So there's that. And then you mentioned PEPFAR. PEPFAR is not a national security, in my view, it's not a national security justified program. It's really a humanitarian justified program, because you can save lives with it. And so if you can put together arguments that touch all of those things, it's generally the right thing to do. It touches our humanitarian instincts, and by the way, it's also in our national interest because of all the challenges in the world. And I think climate at some point will become another one of those. Water, perhaps not for most of us, but for many places, is a rising problem because of climate, because of the growing number of prosperous people in the world. I think there are issues out there that are going to join our traditional types of issues at some point. But right now, I think we have a basis for some interesting work as a coalition, and so, or as a set of coalitions. So I think the opportunity is there. It's doing it that will be the challenge.
Isn't there a fourth piece too, though, and I guess it falls under interest, but which is economic interest? So it's not just national security interest. There are American companies. I mean, we were just hearing about South Korea. Well, South Korea now, we have more trade with South Korea than we ever gave them in aid. So at some point, it becomes economically useful.
Absolutely. If you, just two cases in point, if you actually looked at, say, the Korean economy and the Taiwanese economy, and compared them to sub-Saharan African economies in the, say, late 50s, they wouldn't look all that dissimilar. And yet now these two countries, which were big beneficiaries of aid and other kinds of structural assistance, are now major trading partners with the United States. And we benefit from that relationship. So, economic advancement can be good for lots of different reasons, including our economic self-interest.
But if I could add, I think that's right. Korea was the place where in the late 50s we were accused of throwing money down a rat hole. Hallelujah for the rats. But I think that the economic interest is often a harder sell because it's a longer-term pitch. However, I think we're beginning to see, at least in some parts of sub-Saharan Africa, which we'd all sort of worried about for so long, real signs of improvement, and investments are going up and so on. So I think that's an important thing, but I suspect that, I'm sorry to say that the terrorist threat probably is more compelling because of its immediate impact on all of us.
I think broadly put that's true, but as someone who has to run for office and defend it, my constituents get it about economic return on an investment. Trying to make sure you have a coherent narrative about why you do it and the success stories. I still don't frankly understand after a half a century why we don't have a compendium of very compelling success stories. We do, but we haven't done a very good job of telling them.
Well, that is one of the things that is certainly the case, is that the message just isn't out there.
Yeah.
And when you do talk about Taiwan and South Korea and Malaysia, as I understand it, a huge part of the reason that those economies succeeded was the education of women and keeping girls in school. And that is a story that a lot of people could get behind. Mm-hmm. And that just doesn't happen. Why?
Well, could I just amend that? I think the Korean story, which I've looked at, is an education story, women and men. For the first, until about 1960, Korea was a basket case. It had very poor policies and so on. We continued to educate Koreans. They wanted to be educated. A lot of them were educated in American universities. They went back, and when the government was ready to make the move, the government of Park Chung-hee, the father of the current Korean president, decided to move forward and create, if you like, the Korean miracle. He had the educated people there. I'm sure they were mostly men in those days, but now we have become more enlightened, and I'm sure there would be a lot more women out there. And of course, women's education, women and girls' education, I think the evidence all shows how important it is. So the next generation of, if you like, preparing countries for the 21st century and their future economic prosperity has to include that, and I think we all recognize that.
And if you look at variables, if roughly, if you look at, say, Korea, Taiwan, and Malaysia for that matter, at a certain point in time, roughly about the time that sub-Saharan African countries start to throw off colonialism. That is a big difference. You do have a trained cadre of technocrats in the Asian countries that the colonial powers did not leave behind in Africa, in much of Africa. And that gave the Asian tigers, what we call tigers today, really an advantage as they move forward. Education was very key.
You have a foreign aid reform bill that you have introduced. Can you tell us a little bit about what you plan there and whether you think in this environment it has a prayer?
Like you, having been raised Roman Catholic Koki, I always believe in the power of prayer. Well, it's not a popular subject on the Hill, but it seems to me that we have to start, and I think we need to start in a more comprehensive way, to tackle the issue that it's been over half a century. You pointed out the last foreign aid authorization bill passed was in 1986. We're supposed to do one every year. And so the barnacles that have grown up are considerable. There are over 300 objectives, goals, and priorities in the existing Foreign Assistance Act. I don't know what kind of guidance that gave you, Carol, but I hope it all helped.
We worked it as well as we
You did as best you could, that's right. Now, if I were the aid administrator, I might not want to change that, because when
You
you have
gotta
that
work
many,
around.
yeah, you can do anything you want. But it seems to me, for the sake of our country's policy, it needs to be streamlined. It needs to take cognizance of the different world we're working in. It needs much more of a partnership kind of mentality rather than a client-donor mentality. It needs to be focused on those areas, those 7 or 8 areas where there's a consensus that we do need to be engaged. And it seems to me, I want to see AID be returned as the lead development agency of the United States government. And so there are a lot of provisions in there that do just that.
And at the moment, you don't see that as the case?
No, not at all. I think actually over the last 10 or 12 years, there's been a real diffusion of responsibility, all for good reasons. But you mentioned PEPFAR, and so we have the Millennium Challenge, and we have PEPFAR, and we have other initiatives, all of which are sort of parallel to or dotted line to AID, but not quite the same. And I just think the dilution, it's not like we have a lot of resources going into this effort. Diluting it in terms of lines of responsibility, in my view, is not in the long run necessarily in our interest. I also believe that so long as State Department has dominance over AID, aid will always be a stepchild, because State Department has never really been interested in... I love the State Department, but this isn't their core mission. It is aid's core mission. And so trying to restore aid to a level of responsibility that will allow it to be the lead development agency for the United States government, I think is in our interest.
Well,
Koki, could I just say something?
Please.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would commit, Jerry, to asking all the Jesuits at Georgetown to pray for this bill. I don't know whether that gets us very far, but I hope so.
But they're Jesuits.
They got problems upstairs as well as...
Yeah.
I love them anyway.
A Catholic joke would question whether Jesuits really pray, but that's...
That's right.
But I just wanted to say, to be honest, the thing that worries me about a new foreign assistance bill, given all your good reasons for having it, is what's happened in the past, and that is that members of Congress almost always can't resist the temptation of putting, what shall we call it, Christmas tree ornaments, amendments of whatever kind on these
Earmarks.
bills. Well, it could be earmarks, it could be amendments, it could be whatever, so that by the time it comes out the other end, it's unacceptable to the administration, unless the president spends a great deal of political capital keeping it clean. Maybe the politics have changed, but I would worry a little bit about if that process occurs, how much political capital a president could spend trying to shepherd this thing through.
I think you're right.
That's why you need the Jesuits.
I'm playing for the long term. I do not... I couldn't agree with you more that that's likely to happen in this Congress especially, which is why I'm hopeful that the Democrats win the majority back and we can have a reasonable bill in the next Congress. Whoops, I'm sorry. That might have sounded partisan. I didn't mean it.
But even given the current situation, it's been my experience when I've gone in and talked to people at the State Department or at AID, coming home from a Save the Children trip where I've seen programs on the ground and all of that, that there's not even inside the institutions a great deal of knowledge about the broad scope of these programs, that there's so many of them, and some of them are run by the Department of Labor, and some of them, are really out there somewhere, and that nobody really has it all in their heads.
We calculated a couple of years ago how many government agencies had aid programs, although they don't call them that, and there was at least 26. Every major department has an aid program, and often they're represented in the embassies. It really does make, I think, a challenging mix and an opportunistic one too, I think, but very difficult to manage, I think.
It's another part of the diffusion and dilution we talked about a little bit earlier. You're not going to end all of that, and maybe, as Carol suggests, you don't want to, but you do want some coordination because this is a scarce resource. And so, I really think that's a desirable goal. One of the problems that's happened to aid over the last 20 years is that it's been hollowed out. A lot of the domain expertise that aid was known for and possessed internally is gone. We had the president of the World Bank up here just a few minutes ago. In the old days, it was very common that the World Bank team that would parachute in every 6 months, their first stop would be go to the aid mission to catch up on what was going on in the country, because they were the people who knew. That would be a lot less likely today.
The president has proposed a food aid change, reform you could call it, or not. Would that make a big difference?
I think the president's proposal is, on one hand, very sensible because it maximizes the impact of food aid abroad by not having to buy it all or most of it here and ship it on American bottoms. So in that sense, I think, as far as I read it, makes all kind of sense. But the real problem, and I really want to hear your views on this, is political. If we basically take the aid, in effect, away from farmers and detach it from farm interests, which we probably think is a good idea for the recipients, what happens to the constituency behind it?
I was thinking the same thought. I think it is, on the merits, a great idea. It will be more efficient. It will not depress local markets, by the way, by flooding in outside aid and sort of depressing farmers' produce in the local market. But it's exactly as Carol said. The Coalition for Aid is fragile enough. What does this do to those, to the merchant mariners who kind of count on this in terms of U.S. bottoms, right? And to the ports that service them, and to the elected representatives who represent them.
You mean U.S. ships?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
That's a term of art.
I know.
Because we can ill afford, that's not a reason not to do the right thing, but we can ill afford to be peeling off support for this coalition.
I mean, when we cut the aid budget during the Clinton administration, you always had to cut it. That was a time of balanced budgets, if you remember, those of you who were working at that time. We did the Washington Monument trick. You take out the Washington Monument, in this case food aid, because you know it's going to be put back in. Well, if there's no food aid that's based on a constituency here, I think we'll see this money not only merged within the broader foreign assistance budget, but probably eaten away if that's what's going to happen in the future.
Just a small example. I know earmarks are much despised. But when earmarks were...
Not by me.
Right, nor by me, actually.
I think they make all the sense in the world. They grease the legislative
Exactly.
process.
We have not passed appropriations bills since we eliminated earmarks.
Well, how are you gonna
We can't pass a
make deal?
transportation bill because earmarks are gone. And it has actually had a real impact on the passing of legislation.
I'm going to open it up to questions from you, so be ready. And then let me just ask one last question of my own, which is the USAID Forward. And they have recently come out with a progress report, outlined some of the progress they've made and challenges ahead. Do you have an evaluation of this, a view of this?
Well, I think on the one hand, the ideas in USAID Forward are great, and I particularly like the emphasis on innovation. But I have to say that if I had to create a bumper sticker for it, I think it would be Back to the Future. Because a great deal of what's in there is recapturing what has happened in the past. That doesn't make it bad. The whole emphasis on Feed the Future in agriculture. The recapture by USAID of its budget and policy functions, without which no government agency can really sustain an autonomous or semi-autonomous existence. I think that's what the inspiration there, I think, is good. My assessment from what little I've read is we can't say yet whether it's successful. Everything that was in that report was, this is what we've done, but it isn't finished yet. And one of the things I think we have to bear in mind is, what is the impact of the $2 billion reduction going to be on these efforts? Is it going to, I saw the sort of USAID Forward as opening the window, putting some stuff through, but has the window closed? I hope not, before the stuff has actually gotten going. So I don't know, that's an ambiguous answer, but I think the jury is still out as far as I can tell.
Questions? Anybody have one?
Yeah,
Okay,
there are lots, actually.
good. It's good. Somebody will get a microphone to you. I have faith. Okay, here we go, over here.
Um,
Please
Thank you very
identify
much.
yourself.
My name is Laura Hemeke, and I work with IntraHealth International, and I've worked about 20 years in global development. I was struck by, I think the Congressman said, you know, we haven't done a very good job of sharing our success stories, but I feel like I've heard this for the last 20 years. And, you know, and despite the fact that there's much more coverage, I think, within the U.S. on national media, you know, NPR, CNN has its heroes, which are from around the world. What will it really take? Because the American public is very generous in giving when there's a disaster, a humanitarian crisis. But how do we get the message across that this development work can actually prevent some of the crises? Thank you.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of investments, okay? So the United States has to look at what investments it's going to make in this realm in the directly to nonprofits, bilaterally and multilaterally. So what justifies the investment? A return. Now in this area, there are many aspects of the return. Koki talked about the economic return. We talked about the moral return. But there are also sort of common good that will make for a better world in which we flourish too. So I'll give you, the eradication of a disease is a big deal, it seems to me. The fact that I was reading an article the other day, and there were some illnesses, diseases, I was reading about I didn't know about. I didn't know we had made that much progress in a couple of them. Polio we know about, but there are some others. Schistosomiasis and bilharzia and some other diseases that we need to get that narrative out. We need to be able to talk about, did you know we took X country and working with them over the years, it was a long-term investment. We raised the standard of living to something that would have been unthinkable. We cut in half the poverty rate or whatever it may be. We created 60 million jobs. We did this, that, and the other. It is a success story. Without this partnership, it wouldn't have happened. And we've actually been able to demonstrate that empirically. So I want to hear more of those kinds of stories about efficacy.
But to me, it's all about efficacy to me. And what I can never get over is when I come back from one of these trips and see the success, and particularly something like saving newborn lives, right? Where, Save the Children saves tens of thousands of newborn lives every year. Most of those, by the way, are Muslim children, right? Does anybody know that? And you know who doesn't know it? The United States Congress doesn't know it. I mean, the Congress...
You're not calling Congress ignorant, are you?
I mean, seriously, Congress doesn't know what U.S. taxpayer dollars are doing around the world.
Could I just add something to that? It's something that struck me since I've been involved a little bit with the women's empowerment movement. I watch the statements about, analytical statements about what we've done. We've saved so many lives. But I think the most powerful message can be brought by the people who have benefited or who have led that, not just the United States, but, in the case of women's empowerment, I'm involved with Vital Voices. We have an annual gala, and those stories of individual women who have done things are up there in the film, and they're on the stage, and I've seen it in other places. I think in addition to mental food, you need inspiration. We need inspiration. We need to hear from people, and I don't think we do that at all. So there may be a technique or a technological problem here that we should work on. But I think it really moves people. That's what's moved the PEPFAR. People see it, they feel it, they can understand it. There's a human being here that has benefited from it. That gets your heart, and you need that.
Someone else. Who's got the microphone?
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Does somebody have it? Here you go. There's one coming from the other direction.
Thank you. I'm Mark Lotwis with Interaction. I'm the head of the public policy team at Interaction. And on behalf of all of our members, I wanted to point out we have our recommendations of the NGO community for Congress, the Choose to Invest in Development and Humanitarian Relief FY 2014, which I'm happy to share with you after this session. And as our community comes together to advocate for these accounts, I wanted to ask your opinion and for you to tell all of the folks here who are part of our community, what do you need as someone who supports our accounts on Capitol Hill? What do you need from our community in order for us to have more success in making sure our priorities are funded?
Good question.
Well, as somebody who's sort of been off and on doing this for a long time, Kokie, my first jobs when I came to Washington were, well, for the first 10 years of my career, I ran international nonprofits, right? And then I spent 10 years writing the foreign aid bills and overseeing aid and its programs and so forth for 10 years in the Senate. And now I'm back as a member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So it's kind of interesting, career. I think in some ways the hardest but most essential thing we can do as a community is to become more politically savvy. A lot of people come up to the Hill with good intentions. Their heart's in it and they just want to advocate for whatever it is. And, in today's world, we need to add to that, though, a certain shrewdness and knowledge and awareness of the dynamics. Carol went right where I would have gone, for example, on the food reform. Sounds good, sounds like perfect public policy, but we both got to the same place. But what about the political consequences? Has anyone thought that through? Because if you haven't, something with the best of intentions could actually have harm in eroding support for the program. So the more we can educate ourselves about the political process and not be embarrassed by that or somehow think that's tainted or dirty, that's the process. That's the arena. We got to work in that arena if we're going to be effective.
But is there some particular message that would get through, or some particular action? I think you're asking, right?
Well, you could try do the right thing. I don't know how effective it would be, but
food aid is a very good example because, of course, that's how we got the food stamp program. Was a coalition of the agricultural interests, with Bob Dole leading them, and the and George McGovern, and then the urban interest, and they came together and they put together a food stamp program. But it would have never happened if you just said there are hungry people who need food stamps. It needed the agricultural community to be self-interested and be involved, and so finding the self-interest, I think, is a very important thing wherever you can.
Could I just add something? And I'd like to hear Jerry on this. If you go back to the Cold War era and look at how USAID survived in terms of political coalitions, as I read it, it was a left-right coalition. The right bought on to the national security argument. The left was more sympathetic to do the right thing. And the Cold War went away, and that coalition, I think, weakened, and you can just see it in the numbers. Now, I think we have another national security argument. But what I think has happened...
But then in the gap was Camp David. And so that you then got the big Israeli-Egyptian peace.
That's kind of gone away now. But what we have new, I think, is the religious right, or parts of the religious right, that have gotten involved, among other things, in PEPFAR. And I think as you get involved in trying to deal with a development problem, or even a humanitarian problem, pretty soon you realize that it's not enough just to give ARVs. You've got to have clean water, or you've got to have some energy. People have got to have jobs. So you see the network of things. Now that has opened up another opportunity for coalition building, which I think has kind of happened. I mean, when Sam Brownback comes out in favor of foreign aid and Bill Frist, then you know something's going on. Whether that is still as strong as it was in the Bush administration, whether that can be expanded or built on, I think it opens up another opportunity. But Jerry, you would know far better than I.
I think you're right, and I hope you're right, because we want to, sort of expand the coalition. And the more they can move from I want to do something good to I want to do it well, we all benefit from that. Yeah. And I think there's every reason to believe the faith community, irrespective of where it is in the sort of conservative or progressive spectrum, is quite capable of that. So that is a hopeful sign. I agree with you, Carol.
We are getting the hook But I think that this is a very good place to end, though, because sometimes coalitions are uncomfortable. And the truth is the evangelical community has gotten very interested in third world debt and all of these things. And the other piece that we really didn't talk about is the military's involvement. And, the biggest breast cancer program there is run by the Department of Defense, because that's where the money is. And female members of Congress understood that and just stuck it in the defense budget. And it is a very, very effective both research and treatment program. Understanding that the members of the military are going to be involved in development and in nation building is something that, even if it's uncomfortable, is something it seems to me, to wrap your arms around, because again, that's where the money is and that's where the political support is. So coalitions can be uncomfortable, but they can be very useful. So, thank you very, very much. It was terrific to have both of you, and congratulations on your award.
Thank you. Well, thank you.